My name is Carmen. I was 34, holding a glass of champagne in my brand new living room when a neighbor named Denise patted my arm and handed me the sentence that split my whole life into a before and an after. "I'm just so glad you finally get to move in properly," she said, warm, smiling, half the block listening. Wesley was lonely as anything in this house by himself. Well, not by himself exactly, you know, before Danielle left. I laughed. The party laugh, the one that falls out of you to fill space before your brain catches up with what it just heard. Denise laughed too, pleased with herself, already drifting toward the deviled eggs. 40 people kept talking around us, kept toasting to the new house, kept being warm and loud and normal, and not one of them noticed that I had quietly stopped being at my own party. I smiled through the next hour like a woman who already knew everything. I refilled drinks. I said, "Thank you, isn't it beautiful?" to every compliment about the crown molding Wesley had finally gotten around to. When I went out to the garage for more folding chairs, I found it, flattened behind the recycling bins, a moving box someone had missed, D, bedroom still readable in faded Sharpie. Denise's husband, Gary, wandered out for a cigarette while I stood there holding it. "He still hasn't fixed that third porch step," he laughed, shaking his head. "I told that man about that step back in the spring. Before you two had even signed papers," I told him. Before we signed papers. I did the math standing in a garage that smelled like cut grass and old cardboard. And the number I landed on was 8 months. The party thinned out by 10. I hugged people at the door and thanked them for coming, and meant almost none of it. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, the string lights Wesley had hung across the porch looked too bright all of a sudden, like somebody had aimed a stage light at the wrong actor. We sat outside after, him in the porch chair, me on the step Gary said he'd never fixed. 5 years I'd loved this man. 5 years, and I'd thought I had every version of him cataloged. I picked a curl of paint off the railing with my thumbnail while he talked and kept picking, all the way down to bare wood before I said one word. He didn't lie to me out there. That was almost the worst part. He told me his father spent 30 years married to a woman he'd settled for after letting the right one go. And Wesley had promised himself at 17 he'd never choose out of fear the way his dad had. So when he fell for me and still couldn't let go of what he already had with Danielle, he told himself he was being careful. Just making sure. For 8 months, he made sure. I need you to know the caring wasn't fake. 6 weeks into those 8 months, my grandmother died, and Wesley drove 3 hours through a snowstorm to sit beside me at that funeral and hold my hand through the whole thing. In the car after, he started to say something that wasn't about her at all, and then he stopped himself and just kept driving. That part was real. I need you to understand that, even now. But here's what finished me. Danielle gave him an ultimatum in March, pick her or lose her, and he still couldn't do it. So she did the choosing for him. She packed her last box out on a Tuesday. I carried my first box in that Saturday. 4 days. He wanted to call that fate. Fate doesn't wait for a U-Haul, Wesley. That's just bullshit with better timing. The part that actually broke on that porch wasn't him, though. It was realizing the woman who'd spent 4 months so sure of her own life, picking out throw pillows, feeling lucky. She hadn't existed for most of the time this was happening. She was already gone before I even knew to miss her. There's a version of this where I'm just a woman things happen to. That's not quite true. And I'd be lying if I let you believe it. That third key had been hanging on the hook by our front door since the day I got my own cut. Plain, no tag, no explanation. I noticed it every single day for 4 months. I never asked whose it was. Some part of me already knew that asking might cost me the fantasy, and I wanted the fantasy more than I wanted the truth. Nobody made that choice for me. I'm still in that house, 6 weeks later. The ring's in a drawer. Wesley's in an apartment across town. Some mornings I still catch myself listening for his car before I remember I'm not waiting for it anymore. Last week, I finally took that third key off the hook. I didn't save it for anyone. I didn't need to know whose it used to be anymore. There's just my key there now. One hook, one key, one name on the mail. I don't know if what Wesley and I had was love or just what was left standing after the choosing was over. Maybe it was some of both. I think most love probably is. But I've decided something. I'd rather be alone than be the person someone settles for only because the one they really wanted finally walked out the door. So tell me, if someone only ends up with you because their first choice already left, is that still being chosen? Or are you just what was left in the room? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.